Welcome back to the Metro on WDET, Detroit Public Radio. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent, and we are listening back to some of our favorite stories, most enlightening stories today on our 1 year anniversary. The Metro is turning 1 year old. Happy birthday to us. Thank you for listening and supporting us. So during his first weeks back in office, President Trump has taken a lot of executive actions. He pardoned 1,500 people charged in relation to the January 6th attack on the Capitol. He withdrew from the World Health Organization, and he's trying to end birthright citizenship, to name a few.
That's right, Robin. And to make sense of all of it, we recently invited Barb McQuaid onto the show. She's a legal scholar at University of Michigan and former U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan. We began with a montage of audio from the January 6th committee hearings.
So we're going to see some of what our witnesses saw on January 6th. Let's see the video, please.
We're boots on the ground here. We're moving on to Capitol now. I'll give you a boots on the ground update here in a few.
Multiple capital injuries. Multiple capital injuries. We're still taking metal, sharpened objects, missiles, to include bottles and rocks, and hand-thrown chemical-grade fireworks. This is now effectively a riot.
Those were clips of the January 6th attack on the Capitol played during the first of many January 6th committee hearings. You heard the House Select Committee Chair, Benny Thompson, introduce those clips in his opening statement. Over 1,500 people were charged in relation to the riot, and President Trump has pardoned them. You're listening to the Metro on 101.9 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. Our guest is Barb McQuaid. She's a law professor at University of Michigan. We're discussing the beginning of Trump's second term in office, which began Monday. We just talked about executive orders, and now we want to turn to pardons. That's because both President Trump and former President Biden have been doing a lot of them. Before leaving office, Biden pardoned his son Hunter, and in the final hours of his presidency, he issued pardons for Representative Liz Cheney, for Dr. Anthony Fauci, and several members of his own family. Biden fears political attacks from Trump, even though he believes these folks did nothing wrong.
Yes, Robin, Trump came into office with his own set of pardons, pardoning 1,500 people and commuting the sentences of 14 others who were convicted of crimes related to storming the Capitol on January 6, 2021. We want to dive into those pardons. Why does America have pardons at all?
The pardon power really comes from our English legal tradition, and the idea is that despite conviction for a crime, even if a person was guilty, some people, we believe, are deserving of grace and mercy. And so we give the chief executive the power to grant that even after a person has been convicted and served a sentence. We also give that power to governors who can pardon or grant clemency to people who have been convicted of crimes. It's not without controversy. I think there have been times throughout history when people have questioned whether a person who received a pardon was really deserving of that. We saw Bill Clinton with Mark Rich, who was a big donor, and his own brother. We saw George Bush 41 pardon some of the Iran-Contra defendants who were public officials. But it's there, and the only way we could change it is through a constitutional amendment.
I was thinking as well for former city of Detroit Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick as well.
Yes, he got clemency, so he wasn't pardoned, a commutation. His sentence of 28 years was commuted to 7 years. And, you know, I won't speak on the merits of him in particular, but one thing that's noteworthy, I think, about the way Donald Trump used his pardon power at the end of his first term is we saw a lot of his own allies get pardoned, Paul Manafort, Mike Flynn, some of those kind of people. And we saw a number of public officials who've been convicted of crimes of corruption. So people like Governor Blagojevich of Illinois, who had sold President Obama's Senate seat, tried to sell it to the highest bidder, defrauded a children's hospital. Members of Congress, state officials, and Kwame Kilpatrick, among others, who had committed crimes of of public corruption. And my concern about that collection of pardons is it tends to forgive, overlook, or even normalize public corruption as just, politics as usual, which I think is something that all of us as American citizens should reject.
And Barb, if we do get back to that, I would love to just touch on it about the normalization of everything that we're experiencing right now and what your thoughts are on that. We'll get back to that if we get time later on. But I do want to continue on with pardons and understanding them a little bit more as you're explaining. Are they unique to the American political system, or does it exist elsewhere as well? And since we're just discussing them, are executive orders also unique to American society?
Well, one of the things we're seeing across the world is a backsliding of democracy. We've seen it in Hungary, we've seen it in Turkey, we've seen it in Argentina, and I think some European countries where we've seen leaders who are pushing sort of an authoritarian regime. And I think part of the problem is we live in a society today where the pace of change has become so rapid. And I also think that income inequality has grown in many countries, leaving people feeling less well off than their prior generations, which is true. And so authoritarian leaders use disinformation to try to blame other scapegoats for the fact that people don't feel as well off economically as they were in the past, when in fact what's really causing it is income policy, taxation policy that benefit the wealthy and benefit corporations over the individual and the working class. I think that's what's causing it. I don't know about how executive orders work in other countries. We have other countries that have modeled and copied the U.S. Constitution as a model for their own democracies. But of course, the way people work out the details varies. And we have seen efforts to gather more executive power in places like Hungary, Russia, Turkey, and Israel, where Benjamin Netanyahu tried to gather more power over the courts. So this is definitely a trend worldwide.
I'm Robin Vincent. You're listening to The Metro on WDET. I'm alongside Tia Graham. We're speaking with Barb McQuade, a law professor at the University of Michigan and former U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan. And we're talking about the power of the presidency, specifically with executive orders and presidential pardons. Professor McQuade, when we talk about pardons and the amount of pardons that Trump has issued, we again need to also look at Joe Biden. Before leaving office, he pardoned his family and a number of other people. Do his actions speak to an era of political retribution as promised by Donald Trump?
I think this is such an important point because one of the things we're seeing, I think, is a false equivalency. Well, Joe Biden was very aggressive in using his pardon power politically, and so there's nothing wrong with what Donald Trump is doing. I don't agree with every pardon that Joe Biden issued. I think he overreached a bit. I don't like the fact that he pardoned the January 6th committee members. I think he feared that they would be targeted because Donald Trump said he would for retributive prosecution. But I think it gives people like Brian Kelly the fodder to say, oh, well, they got pardoned, so they must have done something wrong. So I don't love all of the pardons by Joe Biden. However, the pardons of the January 6th defendants, in my view, are completely different from anything we have ever seen before. More than 1,500 people, many of whom engaged in violence. And part of the message has been that somehow they were denied due process or that they were railroaded in their cases, that they were peaceful protesters. Those are just not true facts. They engaged in violence. They harmed police officers. 9 people died that day, including 4 police officers who committed suicide because of the trauma they experienced that day defending the Capitol from these violent attackers. More than 160 of them used weapons. Hundreds were violent. And so we are getting a false equivalency here in suggesting that they were somehow railroaded. They got due process in the courts. They had representation by attorneys. They had independent judges handling their cases and sentencing them to crimes. And so those are all just false statements. And by pardoning people who engaged in political violence, I believe Donald Trump is normalizing that behavior, and emboldening them and others to engage in political violence as long as they believe it is in service of the leader. It will not just be overlooked, it will be encouraged.
Professor McQuaid, I want to stay on the topic of the insurrection and how these pardons are normalizing this kind of violence. The insurrection was unprecedented, and so in turn these pardons were as well, as you have pointed out. So you've discussed how you think this could foment additional political violence. How do you think that these actions could reshape the office of the president when it comes to a president's power?
I think this is going to be an interesting test because the current makeup of the Supreme Court does have members on it who have expressed a view that presidential power has been not fully exercised. They have a view of very strong presidential power. Certainly, Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Kavanaugh have written extensively about this view. And so I think one concern I have is that they will use these opportunities to expand presidential power. One of the things that one of these executive orders relating to the death penalty has said is that Donald Trump directs his attorney general to seek to overturn Supreme Court precedent. That is, an effort to push the court in a new direction. And so, the Supreme Court is only supposed to overturn precedent if circumstances have changed or the law has become inconsistent with new law that has shaped around it, or that has become unworkable in practice, not simply because a new set of justices has a different opinion about what the law should be. Precedent and stare decisis is what provides stability in our government, fair notice about what the law requires, and predictability for policymakers and businesses and individuals. But I worry that Donald Trump will receive a receptive audience in this current Supreme Court, and we may see changes in the law to expand presidential power.
Professor McQuaid, you've given us so much to think about, and I thank you for that. In the last 30 seconds that we have, a number of political commentators, both liberal and conservative, have been saying that the old rules of politics are changing. Are our laws losing their power to the president, as briefly as you can?
I worry that it is. I mean, I think what we see in Donald Trump is a president who is willing to push the limits of the law, even if it means crossing the line of the law to expand presidential power. So it could be that we see a presidency that is transformed by Donald Trump and not perhaps in a way that most of us in a democracy want to see it.
Barb McQuaid is a law professor at the University of Michigan and a legal analyst for MSNBC. Thank you so much for joining us on the Metro today.
Thank you both.
It's the Metro on 1019 WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio. Up next, in December, the world lost the literary giant and civil rights activist Nikki Giovanni. I sat down with Detroit Poet Laureate Jessica Care Moore to reflect on Giovanni's life and legacy. We will be right back on the Metro, celebrating 1 year. Stay right with us.